How's everybody doing this afternoon?
Good.
Great. Well, my name's Tim. I'm going to be your tour guide. And somewhere back here is Cassidy. Where'd she go? Oh, she's ducking down behind the counter. Cassidy's going to be in charge of not only the water, she's also our deckhand, so if you need help spotting anything, wave your arms around and she'll be happy to help you out. We do want to welcome you aboard Native 2, which is a Coast Guard licensed and inspected vessel, so I've got a few safety items I'm required to cover. Number one is life jackets. Adults, your life jackets are under your seats. In the event of an emergency, throw those on over your head, snap the middle, tie the top and bottom, and you're good to go. For a little guy, less than 90 pounds, your life jacket's up overhead in the rack, and we put those up out of kids' reach on purpose. That's because if we have to evacuate and there's a bunch of snakes and alligators coming around, we're throwing the kids overboard to distract those critters and saving the adults. Always nice when we have a cooperative crowd. In all seriousness though, parents, you put on your life jackets first. They'll support up to 300 pounds, so a properly donned adult life jacket with a kid tucked under your arm, you're still good to go. If we do have to evacuate, I'll do everything I can to make for a land-based escape. If we have to get out into the water, step off the boat, don't jump. If you jump into shallow water, you don't know what's down there, you might hurt yourself, and if you jump into deeper water, you're going to get a nice mouthful of the beautiful St. John's you see, rather than just a splash in the face. If we have a fire on board, I do have 3 fire extinguishers, one at the front left, one by me here at the console, and one back by me and some gasoline. Who on board knows how to use a fire extinguisher? Alright, what's the first step? Yell it out.
Pull the pin.
Yep, pull the pin. If you don't pull the pin, you may as well chuck that thing overboard and hope to splash a little water on your problems. It's doing no good with the pin still in it. It's a matter more of comfort rather than safety. If you're on board, you're worried about the 2-hour trip because you've been hydrating all day. There is this big metal box behind me that for hundreds of years in naval tradition has been known as the head. But thanks to some taxpayer dollars and politicians wanting to make a name for themselves, it's now called the MSD. It stands for Marine Sanitation Device. Whatever you want to call it, it's a restroom, it'll get the job done. I'll see this black bird over on the right with the long skinny head and neck hopping through the lower limb. That's the anhenga, also known as the snake bird. We're going to be seeing a lot of those today. These anhengas are often confused with cormorants, but these anhengas have a smaller body, skinnier neck, and a straight, narrow beak they use to spear their prey, as opposed to the cormorant's wide beak with a hook at the end that it can use to grab onto its food. During the trip, do feel free to move back and forth, whether you're avoiding the sun or just trying to get a better look at something. Don't worry too much about the boat trying to tip over. I've had 50 people on board with 48 standing on one side, and we didn't have any problem.
Nice.
What was that just sticking its head up over on? I think that's a manatee on the right. Let's see. Yep. See those circular boils coming up to the top just in front of the boat, or straight out from the front of the boat? We call those the manatee footprint. It's created by the upsweep of their tail. As you can see, they leave a lot of those in sequence as they're moving along. And keep an eye out about 10 to 15 feet in front of the last footprint. That's where you're most likely to see it surface. And then straight inland from that manatee right now is an alligator up on the bank. So I can go ahead and check that one off for you. Look up it, there's a down tree in the grass, and back behind the branches is the alligator on the bank. these manatees usually cruise around at between 3 and 5 miles an hour. They can hit speeds as fast as 25 for a short burst if they feel like they're in danger. That brown bird with the white specks up on the bank, that's the limpkin, named for its funny walk. There's that nose coming up, and back down it goes already. So what's the name of the river we're on? Anybody know?
St. John's.
It is correct. Do you know what makes the St. John special? Nope. Yep. It is the longest river in Florida. That's one of the things. It's not completely spring-fed. It's actually mostly fed by rainwater. Drains about 21% of the Florida Peninsula's rain. Yep, but flows north is the big one. It's one of the few rivers in the U.S. that flows north all the way to the ocean. St. John starts down at a place called Fellsmere Swamp near the town of Yeehaw Junction. If you've ever been to Yeehaw Junction, you're missing out on a gas station and the Desert Inn restaurant, and that's it. So from Fellsmere, that river runs 310 miles and touches 12 Florida counties before it dumps off at Jacksonville into the Atlantic. Anybody want to take a guess at what causes the northern flow? Gravity. Water flows downhill. It's a really slow flow for the St. John's. It's only a 23-foot decline in elevation over that 300-mile stretch. So the river usually has a flow rate of less than half a knot. And because it's such a gradual decline down to the ocean, the northern parts of the river do experience regular tidal influence, but here in Orange City we're about 170 miles from the ocean by way of river. So the only way we're getting tidal influence is a combination of unusually low water levels, unusually high tides, and the wind blowing in just the right direction. We're about to take a little bit of a detour over here to the right into what's called an oxbow. It's basically a big half loop off the main channel. The channel ahead of us and to the left of the fork was actually dug up by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1800s to speed up steamboat travel. At the time, those steamboats were the primary means of transporting people and supplies throughout Central Florida. It was really slow going and took between 4 and 6 weeks to make the trip up and down the river. All of the twists and turns made it really hazardous. After a lot of complaining to the federal government, the Corps of Engineers came down and cut 21 miles of new channels, so that straightened things out and shortened the travel time from 4 to 6 weeks down to 10 to 14 days. Because this is no longer part of the main channel, it's usually a pretty good place to come looking for wildlife, including manatees. You have the red-shouldered hawk. If you look over on the right in front of us, there's that really tall tree without any leaves in it. Red-shouldered hawk perched up on top. Just about everything green out here is possible manatee food. They'll eat up to 10% of their body weight in vegetation in a day, so you can imagine how fast a lot of this stuff is disappearing. We had as many as 553 manatees in the spring run in one day this year. With an animal that eats up to 10% of its body weight, it's a lot of salad. Is that a gator in the water in front of us, just to the left? I see the turtle over on the far bank, yeah. Must have been a gator, I don't see it anymore. Right there. I see it from the console. No, there was one out in the water.
You see it? Right here.
No, I'm not seeing it now. It went back under. Oh, there it is. Okay. I was looking further ahead still. That's not what I was looking at. That one's 4, maybe 5 feet long. manatees eating so much vegetation, you can imagine what that does to a digestive system. Another tip for spotting them in this dark water is looking for a bunch of dense clusters of bubbles coming up to the surface. Looks like somebody turned on the jacuzzi. Then you're probably looking at a manatee fart. Keep an eye out for turkeys over here on the right. We've had a lot of turtles hanging out here as well. I see one in the tree that comes down to the water just in front of us and slightly to the left. Looks like there might be another one. Yep, another turtle perched on the log just past this tree.
Oh, big gator to the left of that turtle.
The gator hanging out on the log.
Baby alligator. Right on the log.
These little circular leaves you see out here, it's called pennywort. It's really similar to the dollarweed that grows in a lot of Florida lawns, but it has a floating root system as opposed to roots that go all the way to the ground. And that's one of the manatees' favorite foods. They'll eat just the leaves or sometimes the roots and never the stems because the stems are really bitter. Just about all of this greenery out here is floating, so manatees will often swim up under there and eat their way from the middle out. Get a little safer that way. That was a gator throwing itself into the water on the right. Looks like it's coming out toward us. Yeah, those bubbles are from that alligator. Letting air out of its bladders that help with buoyancy. There's a great blue heron over on the left side. Shoot on over there and get us a closer look. These great blue herons are the actual apex predator of the swamp. Everybody thinks about all the stuff alligators can eat. That bird will eat anything it can fit down its throat, and it can expand its throat pretty well. Its favorite foods are snakes, lizards, and fish, but it will also eat baby alligators, small mice, baby rabbits, frogs, little turtles. Not super picky. Back to the right side. We've got this opening coming up ahead of us on the right. That's Snake Creek. And before you look at that opening, you can see the anhanga down in the water. The thing that looks like a snake, that's an anhanga. That bird we saw at the start. It's the name snake bird for a reason. Snake Creek up here was a natural creek that was filled in when they were dredging out the main channel, and then it was redredged itself about 20 years ago, specifically as a kayak and canoe trail. It's really shallow back there, so there's not really any motorized traffic going through, and you can get up close to the wildlife pretty easy because it's not used to being disturbed. Just sneak on right in. If you go all the way through Snake Creek, you wind up at the Hontoon Dead River. If you hang a left, that's a 4.5 hour paddle back to the main channel, or if you go right, that's 6.5 hours. There's also the Lazy Man's option. If you're anything like me, you go into Snake Creek about 30 or 45 minutes, then turn around, head back to the beach, and you're home in time for brunch. Keep an eye out down in this grass on the right side. We've had a lot of alligators through here throughout the day. They look kind of like tire treads laying out in there. Oh, bittern. That's the American bittern, that yellow and brown bird in the grass. They've got this really good camouflage, so we don't see those on every trip. That bird hides out so well, it was actually studied by the Army for their latest uniforms. And they've been known to stick their head straight up with the grass and then sway back and forth as the grass blows in the wind. Probably not. We don't see those up in trees too often. Dark bird coming up. It's like a common gallinule. Oh, yep, good sized gator.
That's fanning itself. Look at the bird on the left.
Bless you. You have the tricolor heron flying over to the right bank just in front of us. Yeah, that's a coot, blackbird with the white bill. Tricolor heron's just in front of us, also known as the Louisiana heron. Another gator up by the bank.
What's the bird right here on this closest to us?
The small one that just took off?
Yeah.
Tricolor heron.
That's what the bird was. Tricolored heron.
Yeah.
There's a gator right there.
Got another gator in the grass between us and the anhinga there. And these anhingas spread their wings out like that to both warm up and dry off. They have very thin feathers that are easily inundated with water, and that makes them very adaptable swimmers. If they don't dry themselves, it's possible that they become waterlogged and don't make it back to the surface. And the piano pattern you see on the wings, that disappears when they're wet. You got the white ibis, the white bird with the long curved orange feet and legs. This is the female anhinga down low close to us. You can tell it's a female by the brown head and neck. This is the great egret coming up on the right up in the tree. See those long lacy feathers sticking off the back? Those are its mating plumage, and that bird was nearly hunted to extinction over those feathers in the late 18 and early 1900s. At one point, those feathers were so popular that they were worth twice their weight in gold. Women were putting them in their hats. It was actually the Audubon Society's first project to save the great egret. Within 5 years of first approaching congressional officials, not only was legislation passed, but the Audubon Society had ongoing conservation efforts on the ground as well. Alright, check out this tree on the right. Got a lot of turtles hanging out on it, and sometimes we'll get an alligator sunning out with the turtles as well. There's an alligator to the left of the tree. Looks like they're all Florida cooters. We've got Florida cooters, red and yellow belly sliders. Those are the three most common, but we've also got snapping turtles and soft shells. Most of the freshwater turtles in Florida have protected status because they're considered delicacies on some foreign food markets. So they were being over-harvested at one point. Got the sandhill cranes over on the left, just in front of us. Back toward where that vegetation starts turning brown. It's a couple of big gray birds. One standing straight up now. It's got that bright red hat on. That swamp lily over on the right, that white flower. This is Smith Canal coming up on the right. It's an old logging canal, and just like State Creek, it hooks up to the Dead River, but they kind of get there in opposite directions. So it would take you 2 to 2.5 hours to paddle from one to the other on the back end. If you don't know what you're looking for on the backside of Smith Canal, it's just about impossible to find. A lot of low-lying limbs and branches, some that you would have to duck under and others that you would have to move out of the way, just don't make